In this episode, I speak with Lyndi Cohen, the Nude Nutritionist. She is a dietitian, a television nutritionist, and an author. And she's out with a new book, standing up against diet nonsense. It's called Your Weight Is Not the Problem. How many of us women are living our lives constantly thinking that our weight is a problem and something that needs to be changed? If that's you, then this is the episode you need to listen to. Too many of us are spending our whole lives, wasting our lives on that diet roller coaster, going back and forth, often putting on more weight in the process, following fads and trends that don't actually get us to where we want to be and don't really address the problem where it is. It's not your weight, it goes deeper than that. If this is resonating with you and you want to feel more comfortable in your body, more secure in your food choices, then keep listening. Okay, let's go to the show. Lyndi Cohen, welcome back to the show. It's always a pleasure to have you here.
I mean, I love our chats, and I'm just delighted that you're willing to have me back on.
Well, you're such a delight to chat to, and also it is the perfect time of year to be talking about your brilliant new book and getting people leveling out around this idea of new year, new you, time to go on a diet. I mean, where did that even come from?
Oh my goodness. You know what? I think the thing that really drives us into this whole health, well, weight loss desire is because we go through December and we're celebrating and we're eating and we're relaxed around food. So we get to January and suddenly we're inundated by the media that's telling us that we're not good enough as we are, or that we need to refresh. And so I think we get really bogged down and going, okay, right, I feel really bad. I feel like I've gained weight. I feel sluggish. I don't feel like my best. And it does make us feel like we need to go. And I guess what I call the health pendulum swing is we go we've been eating and drinking everything and anything, and then we swing the pendulum so far over because of that ick in our body, that feeling of a discomfort. So we end up going to the other extreme, and all that happens when we keep swinging this health pendulum is we go from one extreme to the other extreme. And the key, the magic, the answer to health is consistency. So it's like it's driving us further away from the thing that we need to get to. And I think what we need to be doing instead is building these tiny little habits that over the course of the day maybe don't feel like they're doing much, but over the course of the year add up to something really beautiful.
Yes, and this is so relevant to women who are experiencing high functioning anxiety because that perfectionism tends to have us swinging from an all or nothing mentality. And that can apply to food so readily, I would say, and particularly when we've got those reminders around us. I think, it's almost, I'm sure somewhere around the last few weeks that thought has even popped into my head, do I need to change what I'm eating? Just because the dialogue around it is so strong.
I kind of want us to embrace this idea of healthy enough eating. So
Mm.
I think what we've seen on social media, or just our idea of what it means to be healthy, has become so unattainable. It's like it's the person in a crop top meditating after having a swim at the beach. They've got a green juice and they don't use their phones, and a really high standard of like what it means to be healthy, or they're following a perfectly controlled macro managed meal plan and they're going to the gym, they're doing legs one day, and there's rules and they're ticking all these boxes. And I think we've set the bar so high when it comes to health that it feels totally overwhelming. And I think procrastination and perfectionism are such good friends because well, good friends but terrible friends, because I mean, perfectionism tells us if we can't do something perfectly, what's the point in doing it at all? And what we need to embrace is this idea of just good enough, healthy enough. So, what is healthy enough eating? Well, if perfect eating tells us you should have a salad and it has to be beautifully balanced and all the macros have to be ticked, then healthy enough eating tells us, what about a sandwich? And can we add in a serve of vegetables? Okay, great. Done is better than perfect. And I think, especially sometimes with the nutrition world, I think we don't give ourselves permission to eat enough food. And, I think if you follow what the perfect meal plans tell you, they basically get you to undereat. Right? Like a 1,200 calorie diet is how much a toddler needs, not how much a grown ass woman needs. And so what we end up doing is going, well, I'm going to stick to the T, to the letter of the T. And then we don't feel energetic. We don't feel amazing. Our body doesn't lose weight because we're we're making it feel like it's in starvation mode anyhow. And so I think what we really need to get to this point where we're actually A, eating enough, and B, embracing that healthy enough living so we can actually build on that. And then in 5 years' time, you're going to look back and be like, oh my goodness, look where I've come from. It's kind of like this idea of you eat an elephant one bite at a time, not just the whole thing at a time. So let's lower the standards a little.
And it's so crazy, isn't it, to think of us using a score system, a number system to tell us how hungry we are or what energy we need, instead of listening to our own goddamn bodies when we are all different shapes and sizes and using our bodies in different ways and using our brains in different ways throughout our day. I have clients who repeatedly are so overwhelmed at the idea of, yes, I have to do my eating perfectly, that when it comes to lunchtime, it's too confusing, too much to think about to prepare a meal. So I'll just skip it and, grab a handful of something. And this is where we start to, I think the idea you were just saying of enough or healthy enough is good enough.
Mm. And in my book, one of the challenges I had, okay, when I was seeing clients, I'd see a client and we'd talk about all these brilliant things that they could change. And at the end of the session, I had someone turn around to me and say, oh, by the way, which yogurt brand should I use? What do you recommend? And then I just offhandedly made a side comment about what I thought. And the next session has been a month later, and I was very excited to see them, being like, what have they done? What changes have they done? And they said, honestly, I haven't done anything, except I did change the brand of yogurt that I use. And as a dietitian, I felt like I'd failed them a little bit because I had obviously given them too many big, lofty things that they could be changing. And as a result, is they stuck to something that was very, I guess, easy enough to do in that it's a small change, but fundamentally wasn't going to have a huge impact on their health. And so in this book, your weight is not the problem. I introduced this idea of the hierarchy of healthy habits. It's this idea of focusing more of our energy on the things that make the biggest impact rather than wasting our willpower and our energy on things that fundamentally are nice to haves, but they're just really not essential.
Mm.
So simple things like ensuring you're sleeping enough and eating enough are pretty critical things to do because fundamentally it's hard to be your happiest self, to have a sex drive, to feel like you're committed to work, to feel like you're going to turn up and eat a healthy meal every single night if you're sleep deprived. If you don't have enough energy to actually do these things, then it's going to have a huge impact on you. So I think, you know, brand of yogurt is nice and all, but let's get sleep sorted because fundamentally, let's talk about sleep, like lack of sleep for a sec. If you're not getting quality sleep, and 60% of Aussies aren't getting enough quality sleep, then your body's going to search out energy somehow, right? Like it's going to go, we still need energy. And
Yeah.
food is the obvious choice. So when I think people go, oh, it's something wrong with my willpower, it's not. Just let's get the basics right and then have your sandwich and eat enough food, and that's going to be so much better than crappy sleep, beating yourself up, failing yet again, trying to do the chia pudding thing but doing absolutely nothing. It's like I always say, a 20-minute walk you enjoy is always better than an hour at the gym that never happens.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. Or like 5 minutes dancing in the living room. Like that
Uh-huh.
counts as movement and how much fun. Something that I don't think we ever think about to even, often we don't even think about to do something like that that could bring so much joy into our day easily.
Totally, and it's got to be enjoyable. In fact, how could it be healthy if it's not enjoyable? And I understand sometimes we don't always feel like going to move our bodies, but there is something really enjoyable. So I've gotten to a point now where growing up, I had a really torturous relationship with food, so much so that exercise was very much something I did to punish myself for eating or to earn food or to, try and change this body that I hated.
Mm.
And I found it so hard to exercise. It was such a struggle. It was like this daily thing of trying to convince myself that I should do this thing. Nowadays, I only do movement that I enjoy, only. And the big difference is now it feels like not even just a choice. It definitely feels like a choice, but it's something I get to do. Like I'm lucky enough to get to do it. It's like such a pleasure, something I look forward to, something I need. Especially I do these things called mental health walks. Like my mental health walk is like my crutch. I need her. She needs to be in my life. And so I think if we can stop thinking that exercise and it shouldn't feel hard is what I'm saying, and it should feel enjoyable, and we only have to do enjoyable movement.
Yes, I agree. But then here's a question for you, Lindy. I'm curious about your thoughts here because I think we can get very good at saying when it comes to food, I'm doing this as a lifestyle change. I'm doing this to support my health. We're very good at almost lying to ourselves that we're doing it with good intentions for our health and to be strong. And sometimes we might still be falling into the trap of more of those eating disorder or diet mentality concepts, but we're kind of telling ourselves, no, no, I'm like kickstarting, I'm doing this for me, but out of love. It's coming from love. What are some ways we can tell the difference between our approach to food really from that loving, kind to yourself what place or that diet mentality sneaking in through the
Ah,
back
so
door?
such a good question, because if you've tried diets or you've tried countless diets,
Mm.
it's really easy to have all these contradicting food rules. And as you say, it's really hard to know, well, am I doing this for the right reasons? So in the book, I introduced you to this idea of these three questions that you can ask yourself to work out, is it a diet? Or is it a healthy habit that I can actually stick to? So here are the three questions. And so you're going to go, okay, I want to join a boot camp. All right, that's an example. Should I do it? Now we run through the three questions. So the first question is, does this help me become closer to the person I'd like to be? Just a nice qualifying, easy question to answer. Question number two, if this didn't contribute to weight loss, if I didn't lose weight by doing this, would I still do it? Now, this is a really important question to be able to answer. And
Yeah.
so often we discount a whole bunch of healthy habits because we're like, it's not contributing to weight loss. Like, what's the point in doing yoga if it doesn't burn enough calories, is something I've heard. Or what's the point of a 5 minute walk if it's not going to help me towards my weight loss goals? What we really need to do is change that dialogue and start thinking, well, I'm doing it because it brings me joy and it makes me happy. And I like the version of myself who I am when I'm doing these things. So it's a bit like I used to do this all the time. I'd start running, for example. And then I was running to lose weight, let's be clear. And then after 2 weeks of me dedicated to running, I'd hop on the scale and either I hadn't lost enough or I gained weight or I was exactly the same. And do you think I kept running? No. Do you think I embraced the fact that I was sleeping better, that I had more energy, that I enjoyed the process? No, because to me, the way I was defining how I was being successful was whether or not I lost weight. So when we tie healthy habits to weight loss, we're attaching them to a certain metric. And one of the fundamental issues I think as well, building into this, is that once we actually reach our goal weight, the mission has been accomplished. So, therefore, very often people end up leaving behind these things that they only did to lose weight because they didn't really enjoy them, let's be honest, and because they've now reached their weight goal. So, we need to be able to say, even if I didn't lose weight, I'd still do this habit. And that's how we know it's not dieting in disguise. And the
Mm.
third question is, can I do this for the rest of my life? Or can I do this for 5 years? Can I even do this for a year? So I see all these like 12-week challenges
Mm. Yeah.
or 75 hard. And I think that's just a health pendulum swing. The problem with health is we're struggling with consistency. And all these quick fixes try and do these challenges, these detoxes, these things that claim to like help us kickstart, restart. They always use those kinds of words. What they're really meaning is we're going to swing you far into one other direction because you're feeling so ickier. And as I said, like it's getting us further away from consistency. So what we need when we feel that feeling is we need to fight the temptation to do the quick fix thing. And I know that's the hardest thing, to be like, oh, I hate how I feel in my body right now, but I'm just going to take this slow and do the slow thing. Um, and I think we just need to be able to say, I can stick to this for the rest of my life or for at least 5 years, because if you do lose the weight or you do get healthier, if you can't stick to it, you're just going to regain weight, statistically more weight than what you originally started at. And you've probably done this whole dance a million times. So, how about this year we start doing things differently? What if instead of setting a weight loss goal this year, you set a goal to move your body in a way that felt really enjoyable? What if this is the year you never weighed yourself? What if this is the year that you were incredibly kind to yourself? What goal can you be setting for yourself that isn't aligned with weight loss and that is actually doable and sustainable?
Beautiful. You're actually making me reflect on a meditation, like my approach to meditation, which a couple of years ago I did this challenge. It was like a 60-day challenge to meditate morning and night, 20 minutes. And I overdid it. And it was not something that I was kind of doing it from a different, obviously, it wasn't a weight loss goal, but it was almost an ego thing. It was like, I'll be this like meditation person that's like so good at meditating that I meditate for 40 minutes a day. And it was too much. And what I can sustain and what I do now is some days I don't meditate at all, but most mornings I meditate in the way that is most enjoyable to me. And that's where I love like sitting there visualizing my future and listening to like beautiful music. And I just found a way to make it something that I enjoyed. And sometimes taking it out of the context of like what we're talking about can help shift things. So I hope that's helpful for anyone listening.
Oh, I really love that. And I think so often when we set health goals, we can set them as hard and fast targets.
Yeah.
Like, I have to exercise every day. I have to meditate every day for this amount of time. And I think what you're saying is you have this kind of loose goal to go, I like to meditate most days, but if you miss a day, you're not beating yourself up over it. It's like how I feel with my mental health walks. They're there for me. Something I get to do. If I miss a day, I'm not like I haven't ruined anything. I haven't fallen off the bandwagon. If I eat more than I planned on the weekends, there's nothing to be stuffed up. This is all part of the way that I approach things, that I allow imperfections and not doing things 100%, and I'm still in my mind achieving my goals by doing that.
So, just to shift a little bit, I'm going to see how you answer this question. Why is your weight not the problem? Your book is called Your Weight is Not the Problem, just for anyone who's not sure. But why is our weight not the problem? It's so, everything in society is geared towards, well, you need to lose weight. You go to the doctor's office, if you have other health conditions and you fit into a certain category, they'll say you need to lose weight. We're conditioned to see it as first and foremost about our weight.
Yeah. I grew up thinking my weight was a problem. Like, everyone around me would say things like, you'd be so pretty if you lost weight, or, pull in your stomach, or do you really need second helpings? All this kind of stuff. And I'd go see a doctor and I'd say, I'm feeling all these symptoms. And they'd say, yeah, but you need to lose weight. And I kept getting ignored, and I wanted to yell at that doctor and say, I have tried countless ways. My weight has been this my sole focus. I focused on my weight for a decade, and all that resulted from me believing my weight was the problem is that I dieted, and I ended up to a point where I was 20 kilograms heavier than I normally am, and hated myself. I was more committed to dieting than anyone. Well, really, just as committed as you can get. And yet it had led me to gain weight. So I keep coming across so many smart, brilliant people who are in this exact position where I was, 15 years ago, where they feel like their weight is the problem and they think dieting is the solution. And fundamentally, we need to recognize that dieting is the problem. It's causing you to think that your weight is this issue that needs to be treated. And firstly, weight isn't even a behavior. Weight is just a something. So why are we trying to, we can change behaviors, which can have outcomes in other ways, but stop trying to focus on the very thing that you think is the problem. In fact, our hyperfixation on trying to lose weight makes it so much harder for us to lose weight. It's like, as soon as I tell you you're not allowed to eat this food, it's the very food that you want to eat. When you do finally eat it, it increases the intensity with how much joy you eat it with. So you become, people tell me, I feel addicted to food. We can't really be addicted to something that we need for survival. That's an important thing to recognize. And it's really this whole idea of thinking that cutting it out helps you eat less of it. There is research around, like, if you don't have sugar for a certain period, you do get reduced levels of cravings for sugar, but that's only while you're not eating sugar. The minute you have sugar, it's like there's a party in your brain, and then your physical response to sugar is even amplified. And I just want to like throw out this research to you that I think is very interesting. I do talk about this in the book. It's called the milkshake experiment. A beautiful researcher called Elia Crum talked about it. And it's a really awesome kind of way to think about how our relationship with food matters so intensely. What she did, she created a milkshake, and she mixed up one big batch and she split it off into two batches. And the one, she was like, okay, I'm going to tell it was about 350 calories, this shake, by the way. To the one group, she said, this is a Sensi shake. There's 120 calories, the low calorie, low fat, healthy shake. And she gave them that shake. Then to the other group, she said, this is an indulgent milkshake. It's 600 calories. It's luscious. It's delicious. It's thick. It's creamy. It's got lots of fat in it. And then she wanted to measure them physiologically. How did their bodies differ in their response? And what she found was pretty amazing. So, their ghrelin response, ghrelin is your hunger hormone. It basically tells you when you've had enough food. It tells you when you need more food. It's really important for regulating metabolism. If you feel like you've got really high ghrelin levels, your body will actually slow your metabolism in case you don't get food. Okay. Now, exact same milkshake, remember? So the people who got the Sensi shake, their ghrelin levels stayed elevated far longer than the people who knew and thought they had this indulgent shake. And I think what's really important to recognize about this is we think it's just our psychology and our relationship with food, but it's changing us on a physiological level, the way that our body is slowing our metabolism, how it's actually digesting this food. It's all dependent on how we think about food, and it can override things like how many calories something contains. And this is why not focusing on your weight and focusing on your relationship with food and liking, doing things because you enjoy them, not as punishment, is so very, very important. And if you have tried all the approaches, if you're like, I have tried intermittent fasting, I've done it all, I have counted points, and you're sick of starting a new diet every Monday, there's nothing wrong with your willpower. There's nothing wrong with your weight. We need to address the real problem, which is your relationship with food and dieting, which is causing this to all become a much bigger issue than it needs to be.
Oh my gosh, the hypnotherapy obsessed part of me is just like so loving that explanation, because you are very clearly demonstrating how our perception of the food that we eat has such an important role. It makes food healthier, or it makes food, in a way, less healthy, might be one way, if depending on how we perceive it. How crazy is that? But if anyone's there kind of doubting or wondering, like, does it really make a big difference if I'm freaking out about this treat I'm having and telling myself I can only have this treat today? That's having an impact on your body, as opposed to you saying, yeah, I'm going to enjoy this and then I'm going to go move on with my life.
Oh man, and that's what I think we should be doing, because we don't understand the impact that feeling this way about food. We know there's an interrelationship between stress and food, and how this all impacts our hormones and all the other things, and how it has a huge flow on effect. I talk about in this book quite often about how we've been passing down disordered eating from generation to generation. So if you're someone who grew up being told you should eat less, or finish everything on your plate, or breakfast is the most important meal of the day, you've been given these unhealthy ways of thinking about food, or even just this idea of we eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and we eat by the clock as opposed to eating when we're hungry. And
Mm.
I think what this book is about is it's helping you as the reader go, okay, how do I create a healthy relationship with my food? But if you have kids, or you're planning to have kids, or there are little people in your life who you want to positively influence, this book is a guidebook for how to give them a better relationship with food than you currently have as well. So even if you're not willing to do it for yourself, you can do it for your kids. You can do it for that next generation, so we can stop passing on these weird food things.
Yeah.
And so we can all just eat when we feel hungry, be relaxed about it, and think about how much more headspace you would have if your world wasn't preoccupied by eating the perfect way, the right calories, to weighing the right amount. You could learn languages. You could start new businesses. You can rest more. Whatever it is you need in your life, I'm sure with that more headspace, you could get it.
We've all had that experience too, where obsession around food and then feeling terrible about your body can ruin your day. It can ruin a social event. It can ruin moments of intimacy with a partner. Like, there's so many ways it leaks into our lives as well. I do want to also touch on this too, Lyndi, because even though this is not a women only problem, it's certainly, there's a lot of cultural influences that put the pressure onto women, Can we just touch on the fact that it's really badass as a woman to the patriarchy to say, I'm not going to be controlled by these ideas that I need to be tiny to be attractive and to be worthy of existing?
Yes, I mean, isn't it fat is a feminist issue? Isn't that right? I on social media, so I've got a few followers on Instagram, and anytime I
Just
share
a few.
something, I've
Just
got a
a
few,
few.
and if I get negative comments, especially negative comments about how I look, they're from men. Men are the ones who are saying, you don't really look like a nutritionist, or you have to get your mouth fixed, or all these things like, or I only trust dietitians in bikinis. Anything kind of awful that they would say is, it's just strange because my following is mostly women. I have very few men who follow me. And yet the ones who are always telling me that I don't look good enough, that I'm not pretty enough, that I'm not thin enough, it's men. And so I think it is really badass to kind of step up and go, no, I'm not going to keep my life small, my body small, so I can please you with how I look aesthetically. And that's scary. You know what? Because I think we want to be liked. And I think as women, I was taught growing up that my worth was very much based on how I looked, how pretty I was. And, it was always like my brothers should aim to be CEOs and I should try to marry a CEO. That was kind of the advice and the rhetoric. Um, and I think we need to push away from that. I'm not promising anyone to make anyone a model. Like, I'm just not interested in that. I'm not trying to give you a perfect body, but I want you to get to the point where you have enough headspace to do all the things that you need to do to live your best life, because you're never going to reach your potential when you're not eating enough. The saying goes, you can't live a full life on an empty stomach. And it's so true. If every thought keeps coming back to food and how much you're allowed to eat, your potential is very, very limited. And this is kind of an idea of this is how we get controlled, because we spend so much headspace as women on how we look and grooming and trying to weigh less, that it actually means that we don't end up doing as much as we possibly could with our wonderful brains.
There's a question I love to ask people about too, which is why do we even want the perfect body? Why do we want to be a supermodel? Because if we actually look at the interviews with supermodels, or we talk like see what's actually going on in their lives when they do open up about it, they're usually not necessarily incredibly happy people. And they usually have just as many insecurities, just as many self doubt, just as many heartbreaks and rejections from it. So if you think that's going to protect you for your heart, like it doesn't necessarily mean that. Like, why
Amen.
is it? Why is it that we want the perfect body? We've got this lie that we think it's going to make our lives perfect.
Yeah, and it certainly doesn't. I think the aspiration is to feel comfortable in our skin and in our body, and for it to be a non-issue, to feel like a non-issue. But I certainly know from all interviews that I've seen and research is that models tend to be more insecure. I think when you're being told that this is what your self-worth depends on, it's easy to get insecure on the days where you wake up and you don't feel great. And we're all going to have those days where you're going to catch a glimpse of yourself in the reflection and be like, oh, I look like a constipated pigeon, and it's not your best angle, and that's okay. You're allowed to have not great angles. I think what I talk about that in this book is this idea of unconditional confidence, which is a kind of confidence that doesn't come off with your makeup. It doesn't wash away if you gain a little bit of weight. It's not dependent on you wearing Spanx. This kind of confidence is the kind that's like this innate inner deep confidence that perhaps more than anything that I'm selling, I sell liking yourself. I'm very big on people liking themselves. I think that's fundamentally, I'm proud of the fact that of like, whether it's writing a book or anything that I've accomplished in my life, the thing I'm most proud of is the fact that I like myself, that I go to bed at night and I'm pleased with myself, and the mistakes I've made, I can tolerate them and accept them, and I have inner peace. And I think that's what all of this is really boiling down to, that is what success feels like and looks like, rather than how much money you have or how pretty you are. What does it matter if you go to bed liking yourself? That's like such a win.
I mean, I guess it depends what's success to you. But
Mm.
I guess as well, it's helping people bypass the complete mental mess and, you know, spiral of thinking that you're going to get that feeling from changing your body or the way that you eat,
Hmm.
or what you're eating and controlling it more.
Amen. There's this other idea. I think so. What I talk about in this book is giving ourselves permission to eat the foods that we need to eat. And I think people get really scared because they go, I'm if I let myself eat whatever I want, I'm just gonna lose control around food. I'm gonna face plant into the pantry. I'm never coming out. I won't be able to stop eating. And my weight is gonna spiral out of control, which for a dieter is perhaps the most scary thing. Realistically, it's a really scary idea. And if that is you, or you're worried about that, what I want you to know is the exact opposite tends to happen. So when we control what we eat, we try to eat less. This is when we get binge, emotional, out of control, chaotic eating, because it just sets off this primal survival switch, which makes us go, right, I need to get as soon as I do get access to food, I have to get as much food as I possibly can. And that is very unhealthy. Once we know that there is full permission, we trust anytime I want food, I can have food, I can eat as much as I need, the body can start to relax because you are not activating that primal survival switch anymore where it goes, I need to get as much food as possible. So if you're worried about weight gain, I want to say that what we know from the research is that dieting and trying to weigh less is a recipe for weighing more. So, if you've kept trying the same strategy of trying to diet yourself to weigh less, and you're now listening to this podcast going, "This is still a problem," and I've been dedicated to this and trying to solve it, I urge you to try a new approach. To start to go, I'm going to do the scary thing and just see how it goes and get the right support to do it. I don't think you can do this alone. I think when you live in this world that's constantly diet noises everywhere, where you've especially spent years dieting, it's very hard to know how to boycott all those little messages that are going to throw you off course, which is why I do recommend getting professional support. They might be reading my book as like a nice starting place and then building from there, because we need to know how to do this correctly so we can kind of avoid all that nonsense.
You need to be really immersed in supportive language and people reinforcing and reminding you. I mean, I've been down this path myself. I know what the binge eating's like. I know how out of control you can feel. And the way I can be sometimes with food now, I forget to even think about it. But because I think so little about food, and it's just, I know some nutrition principles, I apply them like speaking a language that I now speak fluently. I don't have to think about it. I actually it takes up such little space that I can't believe it. I can't believe I could just go through a day and not be constantly thinking, where are the snacks? Where are the snacks? Like, how am I going to make it to dinner without snacking? Like the things that I used to really obsess about and then need to completely binge all afternoon to get through.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that you could become someone who forgets to eat.
Yeah.
But this is what it is for someone who eats intuitively, who doesn't get obsessed. And you could see how naturally your body will naturally find a weight that feels comfortable for itself,
Yeah.
where by doing those kinds of things, because when if you are really hungry, you're going to remember to eat.
Exactly. And that doesn't mean I never eat processed food. It doesn't mean I never like I don't want to even use the word overeat,
Eat
but eat
more so you feel
eat
uncomfortable.
beyond fullness. Yeah, hell yeah, over Christmas and whenever, like, whenever the mood strikes. But there's permission to do that when the mood strikes. And so there's no overhang the next following days. The kinder I've been, the more flexible and chilled I've been around food, the more the rhythm sets in and your
Mm.
body takes over, which is amazing.
And it does. Your body has a vested interest in keeping you your most energized and your happiest self. So we need to stop referring to all these external gurus and things to tell us how to eat. Will guide you on how to eat well for your body. And that's your appetite is guiding you all the time.
Exactly. And I would say, Lyndi, I always thought I wasn't doing that to myself because I wasn't necessarily trying to eat nothing. I was cutting out massive food groups though, or I was cutting out, I had specific rules around food. So I didn't think that was so bad. And I would love your insight around the idea because I do have some clients who, for example, just feel awful when they eat dairy and or gluten is another one, and I know you mentioned things like celiac disease in your book. So when we do have to, let's go with celiac disease, you are diagnosed with celiac, you have to cut out gluten for your health. How do we navigate such a shift without getting down the wrong spiral with that?
Oh, yeah. And it's so hard because, as we talked about, the minute you tell yourself, I'm not allowed to eat these foods, you may end up seeking out those very foods and eating them in way greater quantities than you ever would normally. And so I think with, let's say you're celiac and you're noticing, okay, all I want to eat is like a croissant, a normal freaking croissant, and I'm doing it and I'm binge eating on these foods that I shouldn't be having. I think what we do need to do is kind of take a bit more of a long-term approach and go, we need to resolve this binge eating problem. We need to kind of create a sense where you feel like there is permission to eat food again. And we're going to get there slowly.
Mhm.
Um, so it might look like it, and I know it sounds crazy with celiac. I think the first step would actually look at it is going, right, what alternatives can you have that's going to help you not feel deprived? That's
Yeah.
important. And there might be, it might be this whole idea. Okay, carbohydrates. Can we talk about
It's such a
carbohydrates?
it's such a big question. It is
It,
like
Let's talk about carbohydrates because very commonly, the very foods you end up binging and emotional eating on are the very foods that you tell yourself I shouldn't eat. And so when we think about celiac disease, there is this correlation. Is it gluten or is it carbohydrates that you're fearing and you're telling yourself? Is the reason that you're eating all these gluten containing foods because you're telling yourself carbohydrates are bad? Or is it purely because there is you're like, I can't have gluten and I'm allowed? Very often these two are very interrelated. And so the reason you end up eating all this gluten is because you're actually inadvertently thinking, I'm not allowed to have any carbohydrates. I'm not allowed to have all these unhealthy, quote, quote, foods. And I think by changing our relationship with carbohydrates, we'd first try and have, can you have like gluten-free pizzas and all those kinds of options?
Yeah.
Now, if you have someone who has an intolerance, what we want to be doing is kind of going, well, if by telling yourself you're not allowed to have ice cream and you have dairy intolerance, you end up eating a liter of ice cream, well, clearly this solution is not working. And what we need to say is, well, how do we integrate dairy in perhaps smaller quantities in different ways so that we can normalize it? So that, in a few months' time, you're going to get to the point where you go, it's a choice again. I don't feel like having dairy because I choose not to. I know I can eat it, but it's a decision again. So with an intolerance, you can kind of have a little bit more leeway than something like celiac disease.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I think that so often, particularly some people, maybe my colleagues in the naturopath world or some nutritionists, it doesn't really matter, not to single anyone out, but we can go way too hardcore with ideas of like, cut that out, cut this out, without considering how that's going to impact someone's mental health and their relationship with food, triggering that deprivation, which then can lead to that binge.
Yeah, which makes you eat far worse than you were ever eating before. And I think we just need to acknowledge that humans aren't robots. We aren't. Like I constantly have people being like, just tell me what the perfect day on a plate is. Just tell me what the meal plan is. I'm gonna
No,
stick to it. And
no.
it's like we can't because I technically can tell you what's physiologically correct, what's going to fuel your body and tick all the nutrition boxes, but humans don't eat that way. We need to consider the psychology of eating, which is something that's very important to me that I do a lot of in this book, because it's the fusion of physiology and psychology that leads us to be able to actually make decisions that help us feel healthier.
Yeah, we've got to see both of those aspects. Otherwise, we just treat ourselves like we're machines or robots that don't have also feelings and all these other complicated elements to
And
us.
Christmas and Easter and holidays and all the kind of stuff that's inevitably always going to be around the corner.
Totally. Or golden retriever parties.
If you're listening, I have these epic golden retriever pool parties. It's the happiest day of my life.
It's the best thing on Instagram, Lyndi. I love it so much.
Thank you.
So, okay, let's come back to the difference because you do talk as well about the difference between emotional hunger and psychological hunger. Oh, sorry,
Physical hunger.
physical hunger and emotional hunger. Um, how do we differentiate?
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about this idea. So we know what physical hunger is, right? That's our body going, this might be a rumbling in the stomach, a weird feeling like I ought to eat. It could be low energy and low concentration by the point where you get pretty physically hungry. And that's really important to note. So we can kind of go, that's one thing. Then we have emotional hunger, which is kind of like a need. You're finished your meal, but you're like, I really want something sweet right now. That is emotional hunger. It's after you've had a really bad day or a really good day and you go, I feel like having something. I think this idea that we have to eliminate all emotional eating isn't valid. It's soothing yourself with food is a coping strategy, but it's just one of the coping strategies that we want to be able to use. We want to use a whole bunch of other coping strategies. So we have like a whole list of things that we can turn to. And so I think with emotional eating, I think there's a degree where we go, if you can have acknowledgement around emotional eating, I've had a really bad day. I just really feel like an ice cream. I'm going to eat the ice cream. Okay. And there's a calmness, there's an acceptance, there's a real awareness of what's happening. I think that changes it completely. And that's the first step. So can you go from, I'm emotional eating and I feel out of control and I really need to stop. I'm only allowed one more bite, which turns into a cascade of eating all afternoon. Can we instead change that to go, I've had a hard day, and have that awareness? And I think already you're going to make a huge change. Can I talk about emotional restriction though? So emotional hunger and emotional physical restriction and emotional restriction, two different things that can both trigger emotional or binge eating to be exacerbated. So physical restriction is when you're like, okay, I'm not going to eat this food. And you don't. You're like, okay, cool, I'm going to avoid it. This can cause a sense of restriction. That means you end up binging on that food later on down the track. But emotional restriction is different. Emotional restriction is when you say to yourself, well, when you eat the food, so let's say I'm eating a brownie, but I'm spending the whole time while eating the brownie going, I shouldn't be eating this. Or I've really ruined it now. I'm going to have to start again tomorrow. Or I'm only allowed to have this little square and I'm not allowed to have any more. All these are little signs of emotional restriction. And even though you're still eating the food, simply telling yourself these things is enough to trigger a binge. So a lot of people are like, well, I don't restrict. I eat all the foods. But if you're still doing this emotional restriction where you're telling yourself all these food rules while you're eating it, not only are you taking away from the joy you get, or you're meant to get when you eat this food, you're also setting yourself up for further emotional binge eating later down the track. So we need to be aware of not only our actions, but also the thoughts, because very much our behaviors are often triggered by our thoughts.
Yep. And then our thoughts are creating a chemical shift or physiological shift in your body. It's going to
Yep.
make your brain go, time to eat, or time to, respond in a way that, yeah, we don't necessarily want to be perpetuating for our health long term.
So in the book, I talk about this idea, and I just want to share it because I think it's relevant for anxiety, but I also think it's relevant for food, and which, by the way, all very interrelated. Um, is this idea of becoming really aware of our thoughts. So when we notice that we're going, I really hate my body. I really need to try and be better. I'm only allowed one more block of chocolate. I'm only allowed one more square of chocolate, or whatever it is that we're telling ourselves. Firstly, what we just want to do is just become aware of that voice, of course. And then I think an analogy I really like is like imagining your brain as like a radio channel. Like you're just tuned into one channel at the moment, one station. And can you go, we're going to change channels. Now that I'm aware of this channel, let's see what other things I can listen to at the moment. And you change the channel. If your brain brings you back to that old thought, you go, this is a station I don't really want to listen to anymore. And we change the channel again. So that's kind of just the simple process of we don't need to like fix all our thoughts. Just can we be aware? Can we decide to actively distract and change that channel so that we have these new thoughts so we can form new behaviors?
I love that as an analogy that makes it so simple to visualize and then tap into that approach. I love that.
Cool. Good.
Now, good. That was helpful. Thank you, Lyndi.
All right.
Look, I feel like I could guess at your response to this next question, but I'm going to ask you anyway because I want to hear what you have to say. Because I'm sure in this whole mission that you have undertaken, this beautiful message that you have to share with the world, you have some kind of a vision of where you'd like that to lead in terms of the change that that could create in society. And I'm so inspired when we look back in time at what humanity's already achieved in such short amounts of time with, accepting people regardless of their sexuality, sexual orientation, accepting people regardless of their race, their gender identity. So much can change. And we should remember how powerful we are in that regard. Even things like lead poisoning used to be something that was like just happening and everyone was okay with until people stood up and said, no, this is not okay. And eventually we changed the way that lead was used in our society. We can change so much. We can change this. What's your vision of how you would like to see individuals standing up and changing the narrative, the landscape of how we deal with weight and our food?
Oh, a divine question to get. Oh my goodness. There is so much I think we can improve on. And that's what gets me up in the morning. I want us to be able to live in a world where we like ourselves, where we can go to sleep at night thinking about things other than how many reps we did at the gym or how many macros we've, points or calories we've eaten for the day. I want to live in a world where you can go to the doctor and for them to not assume that your weight is the thing that's causing you to have whatever it is that you're going there to see them for. I want us to live in a place where we're not assuming that BMI is somehow equating the height and weight can't suddenly tell us whether or not we're healthy or not. I want us to live in a world where we're not having weight stigma, where women's lives are not being kept small based on how much food we're allowed to eat, where your brain is free to think about things other than everything that you've been told is important, like weighing less. And how we're going to do that, I think, is firstly, we need to stop passing down disordered eating from generation to generation. I touched on this before. I think it's really important. Our parents have a huge influence on how we think about food. And I think being someone who is given dieting as my manual for how I should try and live, and knowing that that led to an eating disorder and years of hating myself and struggling with my weight, I really think that we can have parents changing the dialogue, especially if that happened to you. Just thinking about how can we not pass on that to our kids, because I think the biggest gift we can give them is to be able to eat when they're hungry and feel relaxed around food, and then have way more time to live their life.
Yeah.
I think as individuals, I think one of the things I've been noticing with my book is the way that industry categorizes health is it assumes health means weight loss. And so, it might be like people check out on Amazon and they're like, okay, well, Amazon, after I bought your book, it recommended all these diet books to me. Or the fact that my book, when it's in on shelf, it's next to all the diet books, because it's kind of like, well, this is what health, all the weight loss books are in the diet. All the diet books are in the health section, which is so ridiculous because they are they're the opposite of health. One of the things at the moment I'm trying to do is just to help drown out the diet noise. So anytime I'm going into a shop and I see my book, I'm just taking a copy and placing it in front of a diet book just to help, dull down the thousands and thousands of copies of diet books that I'm seeing at the moment. It's kind of inundating us. I think the small act we can do as well for ourselves is to create a healthy relationship with food for ourselves. And it doesn't take time. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. It's a slow burn, especially if you've been dieting for years or decades. However, it's one of the best things you can do for yourself. It creates so much more inner calm. And as I said, going to sleep at night, liking yourself and feeling comfortable in your skin, having more energy to do the things you love. This is what health is to me. It's not about having a flat stomach or a cellulite free tushy. It's not about having these like slim toned arms. It is about being able to be your happiest, most comfortable, confident self.
Beautiful. And to be honest, can I just say, I kind of love that your book is in there, like this little rebel, kind of like disrupting the industry. Yeah. I'm going to do that too, Lyndi. Whenever I see it out, I'm going to go move your book in front of some of those other books that aren't helping us, and be
Thank
a
you.
supporter in this, because I'm such a fan of everything you're doing. As we were just saying before we hit record, I have been following you for a long time, since when you were first like pivoting into this movement, and I just adore everything you share and what a leader you are in this movement, Lyndi, and I just can't thank you enough. And thank you for
Oh,
the show.
oh, it's my big, big pleasure. Thank you. It's always, always a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you for listening. We have reached the end of this episode. If you enjoy this podcast and you find it helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would hit subscribe or share this episode on your Instagram stories, and make sure you tag at Georgie the Naturopath. But that is all for today. Please be kind to yourselves. Know that you are enough and you are exactly where you need to be.